Good evening all and welcome to day 4 of Ghost Week. Tonight we've got some truly chilling stories, so get comfortable and let the darkness take control. My great-grandparents lived to be so old I not only remembered them, but was close to them. As a child we used to celebrate Thanksgiving with all their descendants in the area. Our family gatherings were so large, the Boy Scout building was rented out. There were a lot of people. I was young but remember those times fondly. We also celebrated their 75th wedding anniversary at the Boy Scout building. My great-great-grandparents had old-fashioned names from the southern US, so as is common they had nicknames. He was called Super and she was called Mumsy. Grandpa Super had been a moonshiner for his whole life, but made a bundle during Prohibition. My great-grandma was also doing that too. They were in Greenbrier County, West Virginia, and they caught the attention of the law. So everyone packed up and moved to this tiny place in western Oregon, not too far from the coast, a perfect place to start over. Many years later, Mumsy and Super are now in a nursing home. They had to be put in separate rooms because Super would sneak out and go to the bar or buy whiskey, and Mumsy didn't like that, so they would bicker. Mumsy died first. My parents thought I was too young to go to the funeral. They realized they should have let me go. That was the first person I had known who had died. I was very sad as I realized I couldn't go visit her anymore. My mum told me Grandpa Super asked where I was and told her he wanted me there, as we were quite close. A few months later, a nurse and a CNA go into Super's room to check on him. They had to check a lot as he went on a binge after Mumsy died. The nurse entered the room, the CNA stayed at the door. Super was sitting on the edge of his bed looking at the rocking chair in his room and carrying on a conversation. The nurse asked Super who he was talking to, pointing to the empty rocking chair. He answered, "Mumsy, of course, she's sitting right there," pointing at the empty rocking chair. Then Super added, "Isn't she beautiful?" I fell for her the moment I laid eyes on her. Here we are, 12 children, too many grandchildren to count, and married 76 years, and she's the only woman who ever turned my head. The nurse thought that was sweet, but starting to get spooked. They bickered all the time when he was here, and now he was gushing about his dead wife. The nurse said, "Super, you remember Mumsy died 4 months ago?" Super looked at her and replied, "I know that. I went to her funeral, but she's here now." Super laid back towards the rocking chair, nodded his head as if to say yes, and smiled. Super then looked at the nurse and said, "Mumsy says it's time to go." Super then tipped over, dead. The nurse was looking at Super and ran over to check to see if he had any signs of life. He didn't, and he let it be known he was not to be saved from passing. The CNA stayed at the door, with her jaw hitting the floor. At the same time Super died, the rocking chair rocked as if someone was getting out of it and standing up. This is what was related to my great-great-grandmother at the time. Years later, my great-grandmother was in the same nursing home. The CNA still worked there and she told me the story. She thought it was a very elderly man reflecting on his life, imagining his departed wife was there, until the chair rocked. Then she realized it was all real. She has seen many things since. At the time she was new, and it was her first. But now, she knows better. I'll start this by saying I'm not into supernatural experiences and never gave them much thought until my own. This story is 100% true, and I would swear on any religion or dead relative that what I say is the honest truth. I grew up in a very old home, for my area standards anyway. It was built in 1929, coming up on its 100th birthday by a well-known Spanish revival architect, and the area back then was pretty much all agricultural. This particular home was the place built to house the family that owned the citrus orchards in a 10-block radius. Since it was an orchard home, it had some quirks, like a built-in trash furnace chute, Goodbye bad report cards, full basement which they used for cold produce storage, and some truly stellar hiding spots. We moved there when I was 6 years old. To understand this story, I'll give a description of the layout where my story takes place. The home was what some might call a grand hall entrance, complete with a grand staircase. It wraps around the 3 walls. The top of the main stairwell is shaped like a giant square, and you get to the top landing. Then you follow the giant square walkway around the rooms consisting of my sister's and my hallways, which has my bedroom, my sister's bedroom, and our shared bathroom, and our parents' master suite at the end of my walkway. Pretty much you have to walk past our hallway to reach my parents' bedroom. My sister and my hallway can be closed off from the main stairwell walkway by shutting a door with the lock. Note, if you don't lock the door, it won't stay shut, as it always swings slightly ajar. Like I said, it's an old home and they have their quirks. The lock was on the inside, so only someone in my hallway could unlock it. In other words, no lock access from the main stairway. When I stayed at home alone, I always locked the hallway door. I was never scared in my home, but it felt better to have that extra layer of protection anyway. To the point where I was nearing graduation from high school, I was at home alone. My sister had gone to college years before, and my parents were on a weekend vacation to the mountains, which are only an hour-and-a-half drive from our location. It wasn't unusual for them to leave for the weekend since I was already 18 and responsible. I never drank to get drunk, never tried drugs. Sometimes I'd have my best friend come over and we'd watch movies, or have the soccer team come over to swim. Nothing was very crazy, and my friends were always polite and never left a mess, so my parents didn't mind if I had people over when they were out of town. On this particular evening, I was alone, because I had a soccer tournament the next morning. Now my bedroom door was on the far left side on the same wall as my headboard. From where my head was on the pillow and laying on the left side of my body, my sight line is directly at the space where people would walk into my room. That evening I was sleeping. Nothing crazy in that, I usually do wake up a few times every night to adjust. But that evening I rolled over and with sleepy eyes saw a figure in the doorway. In my sleep haze I recognized the detail of this person. He was wearing overalls that had stains on the knees and wearing a white shirt with the sleeves rolled up. His hair was mid-length, dark with loose curls in them. Now here is the kicker. He waved. Not like a normal wave, but what I call a tinkle wave, the kind where your fingers go down slightly one after the other and you repeat the pattern. I closed my eyes thinking it had to be some weird sleep thing where the dream and reality would meet. I opened my eyes and he was gone. The truly bizarre thing was I wasn't frightened in any capacity. If anything, there was a sense of calm. I chalked it up to a weird dream and that was that. The next morning I woke up, got ready for soccer, unlocked the hallway door and went downstairs and went to my soccer game. Business as usual. I never mentioned it to anyone because who would care? It was a weird dream. No one had been there since the door had been locked. Fast forward to 6 years after the weird dream. My sister was getting married and one of her bridesmaids, Ali, was from out of state. My family had known Ali for years, so rather than her pay for a hotel, she stayed with us. Since I was on break from college for the wedding, I was staying with my parents as well. My sister's room was a wreck with wedding chaos, so I cleaned up my old room for Ali to stay in while I stayed in my sister's old room. The morning of the wedding, I drove Ali, Sarah, another local bridesmaid, and myself down to the venue to get ready. It was about an hour's drive to the venue from my parents' home, and we talked about our old high school, current life and stuff. We were about halfway to the venue when Ali mentioned not getting a great night's sleep. Being a good hostess, I asked what was wrong and if there was anything she needed, since she would be staying in my room for a few more nights before leaving. And I'll never forget this part. She said, "No, it was fine, but the guy in your room wouldn't go away. He just kept waving." Y'all, I almost swerved into the freeway K-rail barrier. I asked her to explain what she meant. Ali told me. She woke up at around 3 a.m. because her phone dinged an alert. She looked at the doorway and saw a man standing there. He looked at her for a minute, then waved the tinkle wave. She mimicked the wave to me exactly. By that point I must have been as pale as a sheet. She then went on to describe his appearance. She described him with the exact same details, added he had a bandana on the lower side pocket of his overalls, and after this, she and Sarah could obviously see I was pretty rattled. I told them what I had seen years before in the same place with the same details. As I said before, I had never mentioned this story to anyone. Why would I? It was a dream. Ali then told me she's sensitive to spirits, that she's had many encounters and can feel their energy. And as I've stated before, I had never believed in any of this stuff prior. She then told me not to worry because he was a benign spirit and just wanted to make his presence known. This matched my own interaction because I never once felt threatened, which normally wouldn't be in the case with a strange man in the bedroom while I was home alone. I remember seeing him and thinking, I should feel frightened, but I never was. After the wedding festivities and after Ali had left, I asked my mum if she had ever seen anything one might consider supernatural in the house in the years since we had lived there. She's a well-educated ER doctor with a no-nonsense attitude. She told me she's come home from the hospital a few times, always the 6 p.m. to 2 a.m. shift, when she generally wouldn't get home till after 3 a.m. after finishing up charts. She said she had seen a shadow man move between my sister and my hallway door. I asked if she'd ever felt frightened after seeing it, and she said no, that she always felt nonplussed. I told her about my dream and what Ali had also seen. Honestly, she didn't react much besides telling me to stay on good terms with it. Since that final experience, I saw him twice, both of these sightings being in my sister's bedroom, one at the right foot of her bed and the other on the left side. The last time he didn't wave though. After my mum's revelations, I checked my phone after seeing him, and both sightings were between 3 and 4 a.m. I don't know what it is, or who, or why, but it happened too many times for me to believe it isn't real. I named him Philippe, and when random stuff happened in the house I couldn't explain, like my hat falling from the top of my lamp with no window open or anything, I would just say, "Hey Philippe," as to not piss him off. What scares me the most to this day is how quickly my mind shifted from, these are make-believe stories, to spirits exist in my home, and he wants to be known. What else is out there that we can't see or explain? 2 weekends ago I had my niece of 6, Bailey, over, staying with my husband and I at our home. She had left her favourite pink sparkle jelly shoes at Grandma's house, aka the story in the house I just read, when she had spent the night there, and since I didn't live very far I told her I'd take her over there to pick them up. My mum was working the 4 p.m. shift and wouldn't be home until 2 or 3 a.m, so I decided to do some minor chores like put the washed laundry in the dryer, clean up the cat litter, etc. While I was doing this, Bailey ran upstairs into my old bedroom which she loved to play in. I left some old chunky jewellery, old prom dresses, random stuff in there which she loved to play with, and I certainly didn't mind. When I was finished doing the little things around the house, I called her to come down so we could get going. She never mentioned anything strange or unusual to me, and we left. The day after I had dropped Bailey off, my sister called me to ask who we had been with at Grandma's. I told her it was just me and Bailey. Apparently my niece said that she ran upstairs and there was a man looking at pictures in the hallway, and she said hi but he didn't move. She walked past and into my room, and when she had come out later so we would leave, he was no longer there. If a man had been there and walked down the stairs, he would have run into me at some point, and if he had stayed upstairs he would have run into me, since I had to go upstairs to clean the litter box. I'll state I saw absolutely nothing. My niece is now 6 and getting into the imaginary friend territory age, so I'm taking this with a grain of salt. However, she never told any one of us, my mum, me, or my sister, about any imaginary friends before. I really don't know who or what she saw, if anything at all, but it's worth to note that the hallway she says she saw him on is the same one where my mum says she saw her shadow man. In 2001, my youngest son was hit by a car. He was only 4 years old. It was very bad. He stopped breathing, his heart stopped, and he was revived 3 times. The neurologist told my wife and I that the injuries were severe, and most likely he would not survive the night. We were beyond devastated. He was in a coma naturally, and also they added meds to make sure he stayed that way to keep his brain pressure down. He survived the night. About a week later, he woke up. After they took out the breathing tubes, he could talk. He kept asking where Veronica was. I asked the nurses if one of them or one of their co-workers was named Veronica. They said no one worked there with that name. I asked him what she looked like. He said she was an old woman who talked funny. I asked if she was dressed like the nurses and he replied no, that she always wore the same clothes, a blue dress with yellow flowers. I asked what she said to him, and tell him she loved him and that everything would be okay. A few hours later, my in-laws showed up. I told my father-in-law about what my son was saying and he turned white. He said he knew who it was. It was his mother, Veronica. She was from Slovakia and had a heavy accent, and she was buried in a blue dress with yellow flowers. Our son is named Joseph Michael. We found out after he was born from my father-in-law's older sister that they had an older brother named Joseph Michael who died in Slovakia around the age of 4. My father-in-law was the only one born in the US. If I would not have experienced it, I wouldn't believe it. But my son's great-grandmother reached out from across the grave to comfort her son's namesake. I also believe she helped to make sure we would not relive the tragedy she went through. Pure love is the most powerful force in the universe. It can break space and time boundaries. Joseph is doing fine. He has issues from the brain injury, but he is an intelligent 21-year-old now. He still lives with us ever since he came home from the hospital all those years ago. We've had many experiences with things paranormal happening to us. I wonder if since he died and was revived, he is closer to that side and attracts the paranormal. But these events are stories for another time. This is more of my dad's story than mine, but I think this needs to be shared. In August of 2006, my family was stationed in Fort Riley in Kansas. We moved into this gorgeous duplex at the end of a horseshoe-shaped neighborhood. The house was built in the early 1900s and had an unfinished basement with those pole lights that only light up the small area around you. In the basement, there were also the smallest footprints in the cement that looked as if they belonged to a child. The house had a grand staircase that only went from the ground floor to the second floor, and a back staircase which went to all 4 floors, originally intended for servants. The ground floor held the main living area, and my brother and I were on the second. I snagged the master, which had its own doorbell. As for a 6-year-old, this was awesome, and my parents stayed on the top floor, which had an unfinished attic room that held pieces of original furniture. Their babysitter once joked that vampires lived in there. About a month after we moved in, a woman knocked on the door and introduced herself as part of the Historical Society, and asked for my family's permission for this home to be featured in the annual Halloween ghost tour, informing us this is a usual stop. She let us know that the home was host to a spirit called the Buckskin Ghost, as he appears as a man in buckskin clothing. We informed her we were new and hadn't had any paranormal experiences. She asked how long we'd been there. My dad said about a month, to which she replies, "Oh, usually he shows himself by now." My dad politely declined to be on the tour. I think my parents either didn't believe or were scared. We were still unpacking things at this point, mostly boxes that were in the garage, which was attached to the back stairwell near the basement. That's when Dad noticed the light in the garage was out and went to change it. Completely normal thing. As my dad is reaching up to change the light, it comes back on. He makes sure it's screwed in all the way, climbs down the ladder and puts it away. When he returns to the garage, the light is out. Confused, my dad fetched the ladder again. He returned, the lights back on. Frustrated, he moves the ladder out of the way and the light goes off. So he sets up the ladder, climbs up, and as he's reaching to change the light, it comes back on. My dad is now beyond frustrated and yells, "Stop messing with me." The light comes back on and doesn't go out the entire time we lived there. This was our introduction to the next 10 months. Other odd things happened in the home, like the radio turning on to the static section extremely loudly, and there were rooms in the basement our dog simply would not go in. Any times things would happen, we would refer to Bucky acting up. While we lived there, we learnt more about the base's haunted history. We even purchased a book of ghost stories, which included our home. The book also featured a story of a little girl who befriended a ghost, and they would play with dolls. When that family moved out, the girl left her doll at the house for her friend. Remember the original furniture that was in the attic? When we first moved in, we looked in all the drawers, and in one of them was that doll. One I didn't learn anything about until months later. I don't know what happened to the doll, but I only saw it the once. For the most part, nothing too terrifying happened in the house. That was until my dad stayed there by himself. He was a night pilot, meaning he usually slept during the day, and one day he was woken up by the sound of heavy footsteps coming up the stairs at the base level. My dad got up, opened the door, and asked if anyone was there. Immediately the noise stopped. My dad went to check the windows overlooking the street to see if a service van was at the house. For those who haven't lived on a military base, they occasionally send people to the home to do things like change air filters. My dad didn't see anything and went back to bed. But he was again woken up to the sound of heavy footsteps on what he perceived to be as the second floor. My dad shot out of bed and went to the door, and as soon as the door was opened, the noises stopped. He yells again, "Is someone there?" No response. So he goes and lays back down. My dad then hears items of furniture moving in the room opposite the wall in front of the bed. The one with the original furniture items. He jumps out of bed and leaves the house without a second thought. It wasn't until he was at work later he realized he would be going back to the house alone, and questioned what was in the house with him. I was 6 when all of this went down, and for years we have talked about these experiences and others that happened there to friends and family. We've continued to check for more stories online about this house. Others have also experienced a friendly but mischievous ghost affectionately called Bucky. I've had other strange experiences throughout my life, and I believe this house is what opened them up to me. I'm now dating a man who is a skeptic, and while visiting my home in Florida, my dad shared this story with him. The light in the kitchen was flickering throughout his retelling. Jokingly, my boyfriend yells, "Stop messing with me," when it flickered off. The light immediately turned on and continued to stay on while we visited. Don't believe me? Look up the ghost of 85B Schofield Circle, Fort Riley, Kansas. There are plenty of stories from the base that deserve to be heard, including this one, and I encourage those who have made it this far to do some additional research on this haunted military base. And if you live in this house, please let Bucky's story be told on the ghost tour. Last night I stayed over at my boyfriend's house. His bedroom is in the basement, tucked into one of the corners. It's always a bit dark and quiet down there, which usually makes it easy to fall asleep. Around 4 a.m. I woke up for no apparent reason. I was lying on my side facing my boyfriend as he slept. I stayed like that for about 30 to 40 seconds, just staring at him and trying to figure out why I was awake. But then this weird feeling crept over me, this deep, uneasy sense that I should turn around. I hesitated for a moment, but the feeling wouldn't go away, so I started to roll over. As I turned onto my other side, I glanced towards the door. That's when I saw someone standing there. At first, I thought it was his mum. It was a figure with the right kind of height and build, just standing still near the doorway. But my brain immediately snagged on the question. Why would his mum be in his room at this hour? I only had a split second to process this thought before the figure started moving, coming towards me. That's when it hit me. This isn't his mum. I couldn't make out the face or any distinct features, but something about this felt deeply wrong. I gasped loudly, and a sharp, involuntary sound of pure terror left my body. My boyfriend woke up immediately, startled by my gasp. At the same time, whatever I saw bolted into the corner of the room and vanished. 1 second it was there, moving, and the next it was just gone. I didn't say anything to him about it. I couldn't find the words, and honestly I didn't want to sound crazy, but I was wide awake, my heart pounding. I know it wasn't a dream. I was completely aware of everything. Now that I think about it, I can't shake how unsettling the whole thing was. Who or what was that? Why did I feel so compelled to turn around in the first place? I'm still spooked, and I can't stop replaying it in my head. I lived in an apartment building in the 70s, with plain white walls that seemed to stretch on forever. It wasn't fancy, but it had plenty of space for me and my pets, 2 cats, one called Conejita and the other called Chibigon, and my 3 dogs. The apartment didn't have a balcony, but the living room was large enough for the animals to roam freely. It was a quiet place, with no flickering lights or odd noises, just the peaceful hum of the old building around us. Everything felt routine, until one unsettling afternoon. That day after lunch, the sun streamed softly through the windows, casting a warm glow across the plain white walls. Conejita and Chibigon had nestled into their usual nap spots on my bed, basking in the stillness. I was in the living room sipping coffee and reading, when an eerie growl shattered the calm. It was Conejita. I recognized her low, guttural growl immediately, which was strange because she was usually so gentle. I rushed to the bedroom and found both cats wide awake, their fur bristling, eyes wide with fear. Conejita was standing rigid, hissing at something in the corner of the room, while Chibigon, the bolder of the two, stood beside her growling fiercely as well. Then I followed their gaze. There was nothing there, just the bare white walls and the shadow of the chair in the corner. But the cats were utterly terrified. They hissed and growled at whatever they believed was in that corner, refusing to back down. It was as if they could see something I could not. Something invisible, but undeniably present to them. I called their names, trying to calm them, but they remained frozen in fear until all at once they bolted. Both cats dashed out of the room, racing down the hallway into the living room, where they hid behind the couch. No matter how much I coaxed or reassured them, they refused to go back into the bedroom that day. I spent the rest of the afternoon thinking about what could have triggered them. Cats could be sensitive to things like changes in air pressure or distant voices, but this? Their reaction was too intense, too real. I checked the room thoroughly. There were no drafts, no hidden critters in the walls, no reason for them to have acted the way they did. And yet, they wouldn't set foot back in the room. For the next few days, Conejita and Chibigon avoided the bedroom entirely. They would slink past the doorway with wide, wary eyes and preferred to stay in the living room or hallway. It was as if the bedroom held something they wanted no part of. I started to get used to the idea that maybe they had sensed something I couldn't explain. But then, just as suddenly as it had started, their fear seemed to fade. Slowly they began venturing back into the bedroom, cautious at first, then more comfortably, until life seemed to return to normal. I nearly forgot about the strange incident until a few weeks later. I was cleaning the bedroom when I noticed something odd on the wall near the corner where the cats had fixated that day. It was a small, sticky patch of something. It looked almost like glue or residue, though I had no idea how it got there. I touched it, and it felt strange, slightly cold and tacky, but nothing too alarming. I cleaned it off without much thought, figuring it was just some random build-up. But then a few days later it reappeared. The sticky substance was back in the exact same spot. I wiped it off again, puzzled, but it returned once more, and by then I couldn't ignore it. I had seen a movie once where a similar substance appeared. Ectoplasm, they called it. Something left behind by ghosts or spirits. But I didn't believe in the paranormal, yet the idea lingered. Could this be connected to what the cats had seen, or thought they had seen that day? They had acted as if they were staring straight at something in the very corner, and the sticky substance kept reappearing, as if trying to make itself known. I found myself wondering if someone could have died in that room. The apartment was old, and who knew what had happened before I moved in? I never found any answers. The substance eventually stopped showing up, and the cats returned to their usual carefree routines. Still, I couldn't shake the memory of that day, and the cats' reaction, their absolute terror in the face of something I couldn't see. I don't believe in ghosts, or at least I didn't, but I can't help but wonder, was there something more that I didn't perceive that day? My house has, for as long as I can remember, had major levels of paranormal activity. It's an old farmhouse that's been passed through about 4 generations of my family, and there have been plenty of deaths on the property. It was built around 1880, and while it's not got a particularly bloody past, it's got its stories. My grandma died in what would later become my nursery. My great-grandfather fell out of the hayloft back in the 1920s, and they found an old, unmarked grave left from the Civil War that got left behind in the 70s. The activity is common as things fly around here. Cabinets' doors open and shut, things get moved, and footsteps can be heard in the hall when no one else is home. You'd see figures in the doorway. We'd hear a voice in the old grain silo sometimes, which is impossible, because if someone was in there, they'd suffocate. None of it feels or acts malicious, so we're used to it and just sort of take it on the chin. So used to it, in fact, that I completely ignored someone trying to break into my back door last night because I just thought this was the normal, paranormal activity. I was in my brother's room fiddling with his PC for some stuff, and I heard weird knocking sounds from outside the house. Knocking is normal though, it's usually inside, but I went ahead and ignored it. This went on for about 3 to 4 minutes before my dog started growling so loudly I could hear him from across the house. He doesn't growl at anything beside the basement door, so I thought it was weird and went to go calm him down in the living room. I heard the back door in the kitchen shaking and yelled, "Stop it, you're gonna break the handle," because that's the sort of thing we say when something is getting particularly rough. Maybe 30 seconds later, I heard the door swing open and without really thinking about it yelled, "Pretty sure I told you to knock it off." I didn't realize anything was off until a voice I didn't recognize said, "Crap," super loudly, and the door slammed shut. Of course, I immediately ran to see what it was, just in time to see a silver truck peeling out of my driveway. So yeah, essentially just a warning not to get too comfortable with your haunted housemates, because it might turn out it's not them who's making the noise. Paranormal experiences have always been a part of my family's life. From seeing figures in windows to cups flying off counters, strange occurrences seem to follow us no matter where we go. These experiences happened in our first house. When I was younger, I refused to sleep in my room. My family said the upstairs of that house always felt uncomfortable. In one of the rooms that wasn't part of the original home, we always felt like we were being watched. We even captured a photo of a face in one of the windows. Eventually, we moved out of that house, but the strange activity didn't stop. Windows were broken, cups still flew off the counters, and doors slammed shut. These things usually happened when someone was alone or half awake. My mum even said she was slapped while she was sleeping. In the next house, the activity continued. We saw orbs on the security cameras, and I started experiencing more of it personally. One day, one of my Bibles fell from a shelf and onto the floor. Another time, I saw a dark shadow move across our shower window, which left me feeling uneasy. My sister told me that a cross on my desk was thrown across the room and landed face down. Lights started acting strangely, doors would shake, and family members were being scratched or slapped. One memorable experience happened when I was around 4 years old. I was in the same room as my mum when we heard 3 loud bangs outside. We checked, but there was nothing there, and our motion-activated lights hadn't gone off. In that same house, while it was still under construction, my parents heard the sound of furniture being dragged across the floor, even though nothing had been moved yet. Another strange event when my sister was a baby. My parents couldn't see her on the baby monitor, but when they went to check, she was still in her crib. In our current house, things have escalated. We've experienced doors shaking, shadows outside, and hearing the back door open when no one is there. I've been scratched a few times, which is unsettling. One of the more striking incidents happened when I left my room to make some food. I have a Bible on a shelf that has never moved before, and when I returned, the Bible was on the floor, all the way across the room, lying open, but not on any specific verse. On another occasion, my sister said a cross in my room was thrown across the room and landed face down. There's also a persistent feeling of unease when standing in the dark. My mum has seen door handles shake, and we've heard knocking on windows. Although some of the light issues might be electrical, we're not entirely sure. In the last month, a guest staying at our house to watch our dog said they felt someone nudge their shoulder while they were sleeping. No one else was home, and the dog was in another room. I thought things had started to settle down after I was blessed by a priest about a year ago, but recently activity has started up again. One night while lying in bed, I felt a burning sensation on my neck. When I looked in the mirror, I noticed red marks. By the next day, the marks stood like 4 scratches, with 2 of them merging into one. We've also heard names being called and felt like we're being watched. Someone in my family even woke up to see a face looking at them through a door window. These experiences span from 2014 to 2024. Sometimes months will go by without anything happening, but then activity will suddenly intensify. My mum had a really bad ear infection and needed to take her medicine on time to help ease the pain as quickly as possible. She set an alarm for somewhere between midnight and 3 a.m. to make sure she didn't miss a dose. That night, we were in the front room watching movies together, trying to pass the time until her alarm went off. At some point, we both dozed off. It was peaceful until it wasn't. Before the alarm could even go off, we were jolted awake by loud, violent bangs. The sound was deafening, and it wasn't just 1 or 2 bangs, it was a chaotic, repetitive clamor that echoed throughout the house. We shot up from the couch, absolutely scared witless. For a moment we thought someone had broken into the house. The place was dark, and we were sure whoever it was didn't realize we were home. The noise was coming from the kitchen. It sounded like someone was tearing the place apart. My heart was pounding as we cautiously made our way to check it out. When we stepped into the kitchen, we froze. Every single cupboard, drawer, and door was open. The fridge, the stove, the washer and dryer, even the basement and bathroom doors. Some of the cupboard doors were still swaying slightly, as if they'd been violently slammed shut and then flung open again. The room felt wrong, like the air was charged with something we couldn't see. We quickly checked on everyone else in the house. My dad and my 3 brothers were all fast asleep, completely undisturbed. We checked the doors and windows, and everything was locked up tight. There was no sign of forced entry, no sign that anyone else had been awake. To this day, I have no explanation for what happened. All I know is that it wasn't a dream, and it wasn't something we imagined. Something or someone made its presence known that night, and we haven't forgotten it. My friend has been experiencing some activity in her home for a few years now. It started out small, little things here and there, things that would make you think that possibly you did it, or you thought you closed the drawer, turned the light off. Little things. But recently it's been a bit more active. I told her a while back to ignore it, don't entertain it. It seems to be more active in her bedroom closet. It just knocks on the door. She filmed it a few times but left abruptly afterwards. It turns on lights, fans, and the printer, but it hasn't really done anything in front of her daughter until recently. It started knocking on the door one day while she was sitting in the room with her daughter. Obviously the daughter was curious, but my friend said it's nothing and ignored it and proceeded to take her downstairs. Then yesterday her daughter was yelling for her and asked where she was. My friend said downstairs. Her daughter was upstairs and could hear someone walking around up there. Then last night, while they were sleeping, her daughter came running into her room and said there was something happening in her room. My friend just said to sleep in bed with her and they will look in the morning. So when they got up and looked, her mirror that was on that door was smashed, and also a glass decoration she had in there. I'm not an expert by any means, but I feel like my friend ignoring it is pissing it off, and it's moved on to the daughter, which is definitely reacting to it. Is there anything she can do to help the situation that won't piss it off? I also know this sounds really stupid, but my friend has lupus, and ever since this thing has shown up, her health has gotten bad. It's literally one thing after the other. Could this be at all related? Anyway, in August of 2021, my friend and I were flying out to Seattle, Washington for a vacation, so I spent the night at her house since we were leaving early in the morning. We were sitting in her family room the night before we left, just talking, and I could see her living room from my side view. As we're talking, I saw a tall, dark figure walk from what I could guess was her stairs into her front living room. I thought I was just seeing things. She had asked me if I was okay. I said yeah, thinking I was just seeing things, until about 10 minutes later when it happened again. But I was heading back to the stairway area. I didn't tell her about it until we were on our way to the airport the next morning. While we were in Washington, we spoke to her daughter, who was around 9 at the time, and my friend asked how she was doing. Her daughter said she was okay, but kept seeing the really tall man with the long fingers. We looked at each other and told her maybe she was just dreaming. She was like, maybe, but we knew it wasn't a dream, because that was exactly what I had just seen the night before. I work in a very old building that a few hundred years ago used to be a hospital. It's well known for being haunted, and even has a room in the basement where corpses were stored during the winter until they could be buried. One day I was there alone, and I heard a female voice humming a melody loud and clear from the basement. There is no remote possibility whatsoever that anyone else was in there because the building was locked with the alarm on when I got there and no one came in after. When she stopped, I called my friend who didn't believe me and came to hear it, and after half an hour or so she started again. We both were terrified and ran out, and I never went in there alone unless it was midday and other people were there too. This was years ago, but I can still hear the voice and melody and it scares me. Sometimes I wonder about who or what it was. Was it a female ghost or something pretending to be a female, humming calmly to draw us down into the basement? If so, it had the opposite effect, as we ran for our lives the other way. Has anyone experienced anything similar? A couple of weeks before the humming, I was working at my computer and saw a tall shadow coming in from the door, opening to the left, and turned my head. Very quickly it went right through me, and it felt like being electrocuted. I had a loud crack from my neck and fainted. When I woke up, everything was foggy and spinning, so I went home, but it persisted, and I got more and more neurological symptoms. Turned out my neck broke. The joint keeping my head on my neck had snapped. I'm fused now with titanium rods and a lot of screws, and tell everyone it happened because I turned my head and have an illness that makes my joints and ligaments weak, which I do. But I never told anyone what I saw when it happened. I thought I imagined it until months later. I heard a colleague tell someone about how he saw a tall shadow come into the room and walk straight across it and out the other door. He was sitting opposite where I sat when it happened, so I was in the path it walked. I told him that I'd seen it too, and we discussed that it might be a doctor walking his rounds. That's still here, as it is an old hospital. It sounds insane, which is why I haven't told anyone about what I saw except my partner. I'm afraid people will think I'm crazy. but I have all x-rays and pictures of my scar to at least prove my neck was snapped, but I have no way to prove what I saw when it snapped. I still work at the same company, but since that month, I've been working from home, and I only go there if there are meetings and it's crowded. It all started in 2016 when I moved into an apartment in New Brunswick with my daughter, Hayley Ann, who was just 2 years old at the time. A few months after we settled in, I overheard her talking in her room. I went in and asked, "Who are you talking to?" She pointed to her bed and said, "It's Mackie. He's sitting there." I froze, unsure of how to respond, and simply walked away, trying to process what I had just heard. A few days later, while visiting my mum, I saw Hayley Ann playing on a little slide. I noticed her wave her hand as if to say, "No," but there was no one there. She came running over to me looking concerned and mentioned Mackie but didn't elaborate. Later that night, I asked her what Mackie looked like. She told me he was 4 years old and had boo-boos. When I asked for more details, she looked beside her and said, "He was sick. He has tubes coming from his arms." Then she ran off, leaving me quite unsettled. One night I heard her crying softly, saying, "Mackie, don't sing that song, it scares me." She woke up screaming, claiming that Mackie was on the wall crawling and that he was scaring her. The next morning, as I headed to the laundry room, I saw a dark shadow figure wearing a black hat that looked like a cowboy hat. I had reached my limit. My downstairs neighbor, who was Native American, kindly offered to smudge my apartment. After that, things quieted down. In 2020, I decided to move to another apartment just up the road. A few months after moving in, Hayley Ann discovered the bathroom, which had an old-style 3-panel mirror. She could open the side mirrors and talk to the reflection in middle one. When I asked her what she thought she was doing, she replied, "Talking to my friends in the mirror." I thought it was a bit odd, but didn't think much of it at the time. However, she began spending more time in there, and one day I heard her say, "I can't wait for you to meet my baby sister when she comes. I will show her to you." At that point, I was pregnant with her sister Hazel. After hearing that, I decided she was no longer allowed to play in the bathroom. About a year later, I moved to a better place in Devon, and after 3 years of living there, the strange occurrences began once more. One day, my kids and I heard a woman singing, "You Are My Sunshine." It was unsettling when she started whispering it directly into my child's ear. It felt like something was mimicking us. One day, I distinctly heard my daughter screaming. I instinctively responded, but then it hit me. She was at a friend's house. One night, while sitting in my living room, my dog began to stare intently at the mirror. It was odd. He didn't even seem to be looking at his own reflection. I wonder what's going on here. Why am I plagued with all these paranormal happenings? And is there a way I can be rid of them? I'd like to preface this story with the fact that my mum passed away 6 months ago today. It was sudden, slightly unexpected, and happened only 2 weeks after my daughter was born. She was deeply paranoid about technology and was a lifetime pack-a-day smoker. The haunting started shortly after her drawn-out wake and burial. Little things, like the ladle flying out of the pancake bowl every time my son and I made pancakes. I easily brushed it off, but we just assumed she was saying hello. Fast forward to a week or so later, aside from the baby, the dog, and the cat, I'm home alone. I greet my husband and son at the door, and we all take the baby into her room. As I get ready to lay her down on the changing table, I notice a long piece of what appeared to be the type of dust that falls from the ceiling fan. As I lean to brush it off, I notice it's cigarette ash, and it looks like it's been freshly flicked off a cigarette. She was notorious for not flicking it until it was outlandishly long. Surprisingly, the thing that weirded us all out was the fact that the changing table sits where my mum's old bed was when my parents first moved into this house. We joke often that on another timeline she's still alive, sitting in her bed smoking cigarettes. However, starting in the middle of the night, last night and running into today, my Alexa and my Google Home kept randomly saying, "The light is off." When I first heard it, I thought maybe my son or husband was silencing an alarm and she just misheard them. Today it's just the sleeping baby and I in a completely silent kitchen, and it's still randomly happening. I checked the activity on both devices and there was nothing. I really wanted to tell you all because I enjoy these stories, especially when I'm missing my mum. She was such a huge paranormal fan, and my sisters and I have always said if she were to try and communicate, it would be through pranks and electronics. I'm glad that in some ways my mum is still with me, and I wish you all a great day. The scariest moment of my life happened in 2019. At that time, I was 15 years old, and I'm female for reference. My best friend, of also 15, was over with me and we were hanging out with my two younger sisters of 12 and 8 in my living room. We got up to go to the front door, which passed this house's main hallway, which lined all 6 bedrooms of the house. As we're passing the hallway, we all freeze as we watch a woman in an old-timey wedding dress walk from one room into another, leading a little girl who looked exactly like my younger sister by the hand behind her. We all stood shaken. We talked about the woman and quickly realized only my friend and I had seen the little girl. After a few hours, we kind of forgot about it. This kind of thing is surprisingly normal in my house, and we don't know why. But later in the night, we split off. My two younger sisters go to their room, 2 steps across the hall from mine. My friend and I sat in the living room in true teenage fashion, pulled out some weed and a homemade pipe. About 2 puffs in, I hear my younger sister running down the hallway. My friend quickly threw everything under my blanket as I got up. My sister was banging on my door, begging me to let her in. I was scared she would smell the weed, so I was fighting against her to keep it closed. The whole time she's screaming at the top of her lungs, "They're coming! They're coming! They're coming! Help me!" As I'm trying to keep the door closed, my friend and I has to get up and help. I'm talking to her through the door, saying, "Just go to your room, I'll be there in less than a minute." After probably a minute, the banging stopped all of a sudden. My friend and I looked at each other, scared the commotion woke up my parents, and they're about to smell the weed. I took a deep breath and counted to 10 before going across the hall to my sister's room. She has a loft bed, and when I walked in no more than 15 seconds after the knocking stopped, she passed out in her bed. My other sister Lacey is in there, and I go, "What did she want?" Lacey looks at me confused and asks, "Who?" I pointed to my younger sister in response. Lacey goes, "What do you mean? She's been asleep for like 15 minutes. I just got out of bed and was heading to my room." At this point I felt like I was being pranked, so I walked to my younger sister, who couldn't keep a straight face to save her life, and she's fast asleep. I checked her pulse and it was calm, and there was no way it could have been her banging on the door, climbing her steps and then pretending to fall asleep and slowing down her heart rate within the minute that had passed. I brought Lacey to my room and sat down with my friend. I explained to my friend that my younger sister was asleep, and she immediately got so frightened she teared up. Then I explained it to Lacey. She was banging on the door saying something was going to get her, and it took all of our body weight to keep the door closed. And I swore it was her. Lacey says there's no way. They'd been together the whole time. Now, my family definitely at least has one entity attached to us, and it will show itself to us and other family members often. Usually it's just something we see from the corner of our eyes or a shadow standing in the corner of a closet. But there was something about this experience that was so bone-chilling to have someone not related to my family experience it. The struggle with this thing to keep my door closed, as it's using my sister's image to plead for me to let it in. What would have happened if I wasn't strong enough, and it did get in? What was its end game? After that experience, I have seen it as my younger sister a few times, walking in doorways in the reflection of windows behind me while doing dishes. It's terrifying, but we've mostly learned to live with it. What it is, I do not know. I'm a bus driver in a small town in England. I think I've picked up a passenger's soul on my bus. This happened 2 nights ago. I've worked with this bus company for 8.5 years. I've driven the same route for 3 years, and over this time I've got regulars that I get to know as I see them multiple times a day. Some young, some old, taking them to work or taking them to the shops and bingo. I often jump out to help the older passengers with shopping and whatnot. I have a passenger that I have taken for the full 3 years I've done this route, called Jane. She's an elderly lady who suffers from dementia. She was well functioning for the last 2.5 years, sometimes a little confused, but I was always patient and helped her however she needed. I used to pick her up from the bus stop right outside her house, a 10-second walk away from her door to the bus stop. Every day I'd take her from her house to the local shopping centre where she and her friends played bingo. Either way, her dementia worsened in the last 6 months after an incident on my bus where she got very confused and distressed. I had to stop my bus and try and settle her down. Someone on the bus knew her son, who thankfully worked nearby and came over to help. I told my manager, who understood and approved for my passengers to get off my bus and get the next one just behind so that I could stay with Jane. Her son came and calmed her down, got her home and thanked me for the help. We spoke about Jane and I explained how we had become friendly over the last few years that I'd been on the route. I explained she hadn't freaked out like this before, and he said he knew, and she spoke fondly of me and that her dementia had worsened, causing her to have bad spells. He took my number and said he would get in touch to arrange a gift for looking after Jane. I insisted it was okay and didn't want a gift, but he insisted, and him and his mother left the bus. I never saw Jane again after that day, but I did see the son at the shops. He explained that Jane had got worse and unfortunately it wasn't safe for her to leave the house. I thanked him for letting me know and wished her all the best, and asked to be kept up to date with her condition as we had become friends over the years. This leads to last night. I had been covering the late night shift all week, when at around 11:30 p.m. I was driving by Jane's house. The bus was completely empty, but as I approached the stop I thought of Jane as I normally do. For some reason, however, I had an urge to stop the bus outside her house, as if someone were waiting to board. I could see there wasn't anyone there, but the urge was strong, so I did. I opened the doors and waited a second. The cold rush of air entered the bus, and I closed the doors and drove on. I could feel a presence on the bus, and after about 5 minutes later, or 6 stops, I felt someone next to my cab on the bus, like someone was waiting to get off. I stopped again and opened the doors. I felt the presence leave, and I continued, slightly confused. I fully believe in the paranormal, so when I got a call this morning from Jane's son, telling me she passed away 2 nights ago in her home at around 11 p.m, I broke down. I had forgotten about the strange feeling I had the night, with the presence on the bus, until the funeral. I took the day off, attended the funeral for Jane before going back to her son's house for the wake. The son's house was 30 seconds from the stop that I had left the presence off at. I don't know if this is crazy. Am I just being stupid? But I tell you, I'm sure I picked up a presence from right outside Jane's house, 30 minutes after she passed, and dropped it off at her son's house. Could I have taken Jane's soul on one final trip to see her son, before she passed to whatever is beyond? I really want to believe I did, so I have comfort in the idea that I drove her one last time to see her son one last time too. Does anyone else have an experience like this? My mum tells this story 25 years later, and her face still turns white. I lost a very small red dragon toy. For whatever reason, it was my absolute favourite, and I took it with me everywhere. I cried for months. They moved every piece of furniture, pulled seats out of their vehicle, emptied every box and cabinet and drawer in the house looking for it and never found it. The day of his funeral, she sat up with me on the kitchen counter to put my shoes on. My mum turned around for a second to pick my shoes up off the floor, and when she turned back to me, the toy was in my hand. She was in tears and asked me, "Where did you find that?" 2-year-old me just said, "Popo gave it to me." she asked. "Where is he now?" "He left," I said. "He had to go home. He said he loves us." And then I continued playing like nothing happened. My husband and I were in Alaska on an ATV trail ride outside Denali, and we got so far ahead of everyone else that we stopped on the path to wait for them to catch up. I saw something come out from behind a tall bush that looked like ectoplasm that you see in the movies, but then I instantly recognized it as my sister. I heard her say in my head that someone who I loved very much was going to die by the end of the year, and that it was going to be extremely difficult for me, but that she loved me and would be there to help me get through it. This was mid-August, and I spent the next 4 months kind of holding my breath waiting to see who it would be. On Wednesday, December 18th, I called my second mum, our housekeeper, who had started working with us in 1958 when I was just a baby. She was the one person in my life who I always felt unconditionally loved by, because she had never yelled at me or spanked me, and I never felt judged by her no matter what I told her I'd done. I had been calling her once or twice a week for years. One of her daughters answered the phone and said that she was in the hospital because she had a stroke that fried the left side of her brain, and she was in a vegetative state. I really wanted to go see her, but she was in another state. My kids were flying in for Christmas that weekend, and I didn't want to miss seeing them. I distinctly felt my sister's presence around me for weeks after. Her family pulled the plug that Saturday, and I flew to my hometown in mid-January as already planned. I was originally going to visit my mother and take my second mum out for her 89th birthday, but I attended her memorial mass instead. In February, I was going to have a difficult conversation with my husband, and when I sat down, I was very nervous. I felt Jay come up behind me and put her arms around me. Then I heard her very clearly whisper in my ear, "It's gonna be okay. I promise it's gonna be okay." She and my sister have continued to be present for me at difficult times, especially when I was in trauma therapy. I had an encounter with an old friend years ago, back in 1999. I'm a musician who has been in a few bands from back in the day. We had a studio to play and practice in and everything. I was the singer. An old friend, Kevin, had come down and filled in the drumming while we were out looking for a drummer. He couldn't commit to the band but was willing to help out. I knew him years before this. Anyway, we found our drummer and thanked him, and he was on his way. Months go by and we lose the lease on the studio, so the band broke up. A few months later, I got a call for a guitar player in a country band, so now I'm playing guitar. Things are going well. We have a CD and a financial broker who owns the record studios who also wants to buy us a bus. Couldn't get any better. Long story short, the singer who doesn't drink gets drunk, cusses out our financial backer, and we lose it all. I pack up and head for the Great Lakes, found a band and started gigging. A year later, I was transferred to my job back home to Virginia. Every year there's a band and jam competition in my hometown. This year I'll just be watching, so I go to the stage area and listen to one of the bands and get a push from behind. It's my old buddy Kevin. He's with a beautiful girl who I'd never seen before. Not his wife, but they both look great. He looked better than I'd ever seen him. We chit-chatted for a while about music and what I'd been doing. He then told me he had sold his drums and hadn't been playing that much, which floored me. Then he was like, "Do you want to get another beer?" I said, "Sure." So we went to the kegs and he poured me and himself a beer. We continued to drink and listen to the band. Well, the band finished up, and there was time before the next band started. The perfect time for a bathroom break. When I came back, Kevin was out of sight, so I hung out for a little while longer. It was getting boring now. For some reason, me, the guy who knows everyone, didn't know anyone there, so I left. 2 weeks go by and I went to see some musician friends of mine, a singer friend who married another drummer friend. She asked if I had gone to the band jam, and I said I did go, and she asked if I'd seen anyone I knew. I told her I saw Kevin and that we hung out for a while, but beside that I hadn't seen anyone. She became infuriated and kept telling me I was lying. She was furious. She didn't even want to hear what I had to say. She told me Kevin had been dead for almost a year now, and that I was full of crap. I had never been treated like this by her before. She wouldn't let me explain. She said he was in Florida and stepped out in front of a bus and was run over and died. Anyway, she was ticked and being unreasonable, so I went home. I did speak with his widow just last year, and she confirmed he did sell his drum kit. I told her the story. She just said, "Oh, that's interesting." I kind of left it at that. I didn't think she thinks I'm more sane now. I think what I experienced was real. That's my story. I got to hang out with an old friend for about 30 minutes even though he had passed away. I thought maybe he faked his death, but after talking with those that went to his funeral, well, he was in the ground. It happened. I spoke and saw with him and had a beer with an old friend. And that's pretty much all there is to it.
I am Indian, specifically a Punjabi Sikh, and in my culture, some people believe in pitars. From what I understand, pitars are spirits connected to you, often family members who are stuck on Earth. It's said that they sometimes take belongings from the living. I've been dealing with this for years, and of late, it's become too much to handle. The first time it happened, I was a kid. My mum, who kept cash in the house, discovered that $7,000 had gone missing. It was just the two of us living in the house, so there wasn't anyone else who could have taken it. And a while later, 3,000 more vanished. Years later, something even stranger happened. My mum told me to go to her bank safety deposit box to take out a necklace. Inside the box was also her wedding jewelry gifted by her parents. But when she went to retrieve it, the jewelry wasn't there, and no one could explain how it had vanished. And then things started happening to me personally. I remember one day sitting on the couch and realizing one of my hoop earrings was missing. I searched the entire house for hours but couldn't find it. Eventually I gave up. Then, right in front of me, it reappeared, just sitting on the floor, as if it had been placed there. You might say I just overlooked it, but there's more. I also have a gold chain that has a lot of sentimental value. It was given to my mum by my grandma on my dad's side when my parents got married, and then my mum passed it down to me. My grandma never liked my mum or me, and my parents are divorced. One day I felt the chain wasn't on me anymore, even though I had just seen it. I had sent a Snapchat to a friend showing me wearing it, and I searched everywhere, but couldn't find it. Frustrated, I went upstairs to tell my mum, and when I came back downstairs, the chain was just lying on the sofa, as if someone had just placed it there. At this point, my auntie in India went to see a medium, who said this was the work of a male spirit connected to the family. For a while, nothing more happened, and I thought it was over. But a month ago, things started up again while I was visiting my family in London. One morning I woke up and realized one of my earrings were missing. My family and I tore the hotel apart, searching everywhere for it, but it was gone. That night, I saw the shadow of a short person running, but I dismissed it, not wanting to freak myself out. Later, my mum told my aunt to contact the medium again, and this time, they said it was my grandma who had taken my earring. What made it creepier is that my grandma was a short woman. When I returned home, the activity intensified. My favorite shirt disappeared, then a fake ring I loved. And after that, earring and bracelet went missing too. The final straw came today. Last year I visited my family in India around my birthday. My aunt, who doesn't have much money, gave me the most meaningful gift. A gold bracelet, something I dreamed of owning. Today, when I went to wear it, the bracelet was gone. I can't describe how awful it felt. The gift held extreme sentimental value to me, and now it just vanished. I'm completely drained from dealing with this, and if anyone knows anything I can do to stop this from happening, or better yet, retrieve my belongings, I would be sincerely grateful. When I was a child, I witnessed a spectral apparition. My mother and I saw exactly the same thing in the same place, and I didn't see that thing right away. I only saw her when my mother asked me to get out of bed because we were in bunk beds made of wood. At the time, we lived in Chaumont, in France, Haute Marne, at 12 Jean Mermont Street, on the first floor. I was living in hell. My mother had left my father because he used to beat her. I was the scapegoat of my school, and the neighbors of the apartment above ours frequently prevented us from sleeping at night by throwing dishes in the bath, hitting furniture, hitting the walls, and shouting loudly. I was sleeping soundly that night until my mother started talking loudly, trying to wake me up, and telling me there was some kind of demon that appeared to her. At first, as I was afraid, I refused to join her, because I needed sleep, but then I gave in. As I went to the ladder on all fours, I noticed that a blue light was reflecting from the ceiling, and more generally throughout the room, while I knew full well that we had turned everything off, and I also noticed that the neighbors in question were practicing strong enough invocations to make us hear. As I went down the ladder, I struggled with the temptation to turn my head to the right to see where all the blue light was coming from. Then, it was only after joining my mother in her bed and after several requests from her that I ended up looking at this thing face to face. The ghost was a half-skeletal corpse, and it was lighting up the room with its blue light. It had the features of my maternal grandfather. The creature spoke to us, but we were too afraid to pay attention to its words. The thing then vanished, and we were in complete darkness. At the time of his disappearance, the neighbors stopped speaking, and we heard them running and opening the door to their apartment. And that's when we heard them running down the stairs as if they were fleeing something that was chasing them. We heard the squeal of their shoes and every turn they took. They were then heard leaving the building and slamming the main door in a din. And that was the last I ever heard of it, and I'm glad to not have heard it since. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. I really appreciate each and every one of you tuning in. I hope you've been enjoying Ghost Week. Tomorrow we're going to hit you up with the grand finale, Day 5. So tune in, it's going to be a good one. Try and get here early as well. I like answering your comments and interacting with you guys. So hopefully, see you there. That's all from me, other than a huge thanks to my members and patrons who get some cool exclusive perks for a small monthly donation. If that is something you'd be interested in, follow the links in the description to find out more. But that's it from me. Stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one. Good night.